The sound of tires crunching on gravel is one that I can certainly get used to. The headlights of our SUV bounce as we tread the uneven driveway leading to our new house. All around us, fireflies light up the field and marshes. As we round a small bend, I could swear I saw a pair of stationary points reflected by the high beams, like the prairie is watching us now. But that's just the nerves talking. As foreign as this is for me, I'm excited to spend my first night in our new house. This was earlier this year, when my wife and I first moved from the city to the rural Midwestern countryside. Any transition is hard, but this one was bittersweet. My wife was offered a fantastic physician's assistant job at the largest hospital in the area, and the hint of a higher income on the horizon, coupled with an excellent selling price for our old apartment near the city, made us excited to start a new chapter in our lives. However, neither of us had ever lived in a rural area. The idea was daunting. 20 acres to ourselves to maintain and to live on, and we wouldn't even be able to hear our nearest neighbors, let alone ever see them. The feeling was agoraphobic. Getting out of the car and seeing this house we'd toured and measured and scrutinized, now seemingly so small when set against an expansive prairie and sky that were ours. No tall buildings, no constant traffic, not even a paved driveway. It was nice, but just so different. My wife worked long hours at the hospital, often all night and into the mornings. She always called herself a night owl, and though I'm not, I respect her dedication to helping others whenever she could. Besides, I didn't mind. Our German Shepherd Zeus was excellent company and enjoyed having a yard to run through and a prairie full of birds to chase. The city really is no place for such a large dog, and he always seemed restless despite his daily walks. In the new house, he was relaxed, due both to a lack of loud, busy stimulation and a newfound abundance of exercise. I work from home as a software developer, so my hours are flexible and my days are laid back. This new property afforded me many tasks, from mowing the lawn and mending the fence around the garden to simply sitting on the edge of the rough wooden dock that juts out to the ice-cold, spring-fed pond just beyond the green edges of the lawn. This pond was a beautiful selling point for the place, and I loved to sit and watch the tadpoles and tiny minnows flit around my feet curiously. I'd never known how much wildlife there could be in a place, or how loud it could be. Mourning doves, pheasants, cranes, red-winged blackbirds, squeaking bats at twilight. All manner of winged creatures join the low, constant hiss of the wind through the trees and grass and the coarse, rhythmic chatter of frogs and insects. Deer are a constant sight. There's a group of around 7 that can be seen wading through the prairie at dusk and dawn. There was one thing that always unsettled me about the countryside, and that is the coyotes. Coyotes are bolder than you'd think. I was always under the impression that if you left them to their business, they'd leave you alone, so long as they weren't starving or rabid. But from the beginning, they seemed to be very aware of who was comfortable out in the prairie and who was not. The consistent proximity and volume made it clear to us that, while we may have built ourselves a home here, it was still surrounded by theirs. Night after night, they made the short migration from their dens in the thick forest through the crop fields and winding game paths to hunt for rabbits and hope for young deer. And the sounds they make. Coyotes do not bark or even howl. They shriek. When they call or fight one another, an eerily human-sounding scream is what leaves their bodies. The first night in our new house, we honestly thought there was a child or a young woman screaming in the woods somewhere. It was high-pitched, piercing, and sounds way too much like a person. We heard this constantly, but we never actually saw them. Then, without warning, we did. It was a clear Friday night. We were sitting on the back deck, drinking and conversing quietly. Zeus lay on the wicker couch between us, drowsy after an exciting day of chasing pheasants and squirrels. It was a rare evening when my wife was home for dinner. We did not work the next day, so we were both able to enjoy the sunset. Quickly, both of us realized that the insects and birds had quieted near us. We could still hear them faintly in the forest and grass from the front yard, but where we were looking had gone still. Our lawn extended about 50 feet from the deck before transitioning sharply to tall grass. And as we watched, that grass parted to reveal a thin, mottled gray and brown, dog-like animal with large, triangular ears atop its long face. Its eyes were yellow and intense, scanning constantly as its ears twitched, forward and back. Behind it, more emerged. 3, then 4, then 5 coyotes were walking on our lawn, trotting purposefully from the backyard to the front. Zeus tensed hard beneath my hand. His ears shot ahead, and a low, primal growl I had never heard from him bubbled up from his chest. Not wanting him to startle these new visitors, and frankly, doubtful he could stand his ground against them all, I shushed him gently and placed reassuring pressure on his back, smoothing his raised fur. The growl stopped, but he remained alert. What struck me immediately was their size. Some were clearly juveniles and smaller than the others, but the biggest was much larger than I'd ever thought. I had always imagined coyotes to be a little bigger than foxes, small scavengers that avoided contact with anything bigger or louder than themselves. The Labrador-sized animals confidently making their way past me now proved me completely wrong. They were thin, but not weak-looking. From this close, we could clearly see the top muscles working beneath their fur. My wife and I had said nothing this whole time, though only a few seconds had elapsed. She was clearly agitated and started to stand. In slow motion, with her eyes locked on the pack of coyotes, her hip came up directly underneath the table and tipped it ever so slightly. It was just enough that her glass wobbled, leaned, and fell onto the deck. It hit a fraction of a second later, shattering at a deafening volume in the still, cool silence. Immediately, the coyotes were on guard. Their hackles bristled along their backs, and 5 snarling heads whipped towards the disturbance. One of them let out a yip, and they all turned and ran directly away from the house. Zeus stood quickly, and I had to grasp for his collar to prevent him from tearing after them. In less than 5 seconds, it was over. Birds and insects called again, and it was like nothing had happened. However, we both were shaken. "They were so close," she said, almost to herself. "They're big," I responded. "Did you ever hear them coming?" She faced and addressed me directly now. "What do you mean?" I asked, thinking back to the moments before the figures emerged from the grass. They didn't make any noise. I didn't even hear the grass move. She had turned away again, looking over the prairie beyond the lawn. She was right. Even when they'd turned tail and sprinted back into the brush, they hadn't broken a twig or rustled a leaf. It was hard to sleep that night, though we didn't hear the normal yips and screams we were accustomed to. Maybe that was what made it difficult. The sudden absence of that activity was somehow more sinister than its presence. It was as if they were angered at the disturbance, stewing silently as they plotted retribution. For weeks after that, the canines were more apprehensive about being close to the house, but they gradually worked their courage back up. Then came the second encounter. It was one of my solitary evenings with Zeus, and we were relaxing on the couch when he let me know he needed to go outside. I took him to the front door and left the porch light off, so I could admire the reflection of the moon on the pond. It was so still this late night, with no birds or rodents rippling the glassy surface. Too late, I realized the crisp autumn air had gone still. The only sound I could hear was a distant car on the highway almost a quarter-mile away. Zeus? I said it under my breath, afraid to shatter the stillness. The only source of light was the half moon low in the sky beyond the pond. Its reflection wavered, and I realized something. Several somethings were passing in front of it, and quickly. Suddenly a sharp shriek from close at my side broke the glass of the night. I rushed to the doorway to turn on the porch light and illuminated a chilling scene. As the light came on, Zeus started growling, and several dark shadows scrambled to the edge of the yard. At the side of the porch to my right, Zeus had cornered one of the juvenile coyotes, who was looking and sounding distressed. His screams increased in volume and frequency when the light came on. With each shriek, it threw its head back and its mouth opened. Lips curled back to reveal all of the needle-like teeth lining its slender jaw. "Zeus!" I snapped at him, regaining his attention and halting his slow advance towards the young animal. He looked at me, stole one more glance at the coyote, and leapt up onto the porch. We rushed inside, and one last look out at the yard gave me chills. The light cast by the bulbs on the porch illuminated only empty lawn, but just beyond that clarity was the pitch darkness and the long, obscuring grass. The dark facade was broken up by pairs of yellow pinpricks. At least 10 sets of piercing, furious eyes dared me to challenge their dominion. One by one, each pair blinked out, and the chatter of the night slowly overtook the sounds of my heavy breathing once more. I was left feeling out of place again in my surroundings, and couldn't shake the feeling that I had awoken something out in the prairie, and it wasn't happy to be up. A few days after the second incident, I sat down for lunch with one of my friends from college. We recounted our times together and reveled in nostalgia for a while, before the conversation turned a little more serious. "So, Zeus cornered a coyote the other night." "What? That's not good, man. A cornered animal will do some crazy shit." "Aaron has been a good friend of mine for years. He grew up just outside of town, and I trusted his practical knowledge." "I know that. I don't know what came over him. I've never seen him act this way." "He doesn't know the law of the land yet. I'd go outside with him the next few times, make sure he stays close." "What if they come back?" "They didn't seem happy." "They're animals, Tim." "They were spooked. Besides, you're the one in their territory." "Just to be safe, though, I'd pick up a nice big mag light, and, honestly, think maybe about getting a gun, too." My wife wasn't thrilled to hear about that, but acquiesced when she saw the genuine concern I had for myself and my companion. With that blessing and some guidance from Aaron, I soon became the apprehensive owner of a small handgun, to be kept in a locked gun safe in my bedside table. The following weekend was when things really went wrong. A small conference a few hours away meant that my wife was gone all weekend, so I prepared myself for a relaxing couple of days. I could have gone with her, but her hotel wasn't pet-friendly, and I would hate to leave Zeus with a sitter or at a kennel in some yet unfamiliar place. So we settled with a true crime series and a batch of pizza rolls. I knew something was wrong when I saw the first coyote. It was broad daylight. I'd never seen one out in the open at this time. It walked across the back lawn, visible from a couch in the living room. It was slow, deliberate, and looking right at me. But that's crazy. I immediately shut the intrusive thought down and gave it no more attention until the sun had set. Zeus left the couch and stood by the front door, whining. Remembering the daytime intruder, I grabbed my mag light, but still uncomfortable with it, not my gun. I looked hard through the window out into the thick darkness, knowing that turning on a light would interfere with my night vision. The moon was nearly full, casting a veil of white over the entire property. Tucked between two bodies of vegetation was the small pond. Under my gaze, the boundaries of the pond flickered, as if it were changing shape. Curious, almost unthinking, I opened the door. Zeus ventured out slowly into the front yard, but froze cold a few feet into the grass. I clicked the flashlight on and swept the bright beam across the lawn and the wall of grass as its boundary. Those cold specks of light blinked into existence as I did so. Then I turned my attention to the pond. There was something sinister underway. In the light of the moon and its reflection, both dimmed by gathering clouds, shapes were arranged, orderly and unmoving. As I watched, more of them slunk in from the sides and the front, and I realized that what I was witnessing was an assembly. The silhouettes of sitting coyotes were gathering, facing me. For the first time, I processed that the night was silent. One by one, fat raindrops began to splatter on the roof above the porch and the concrete steps below me. A sudden violent crack of lightning shocked me from my stupor, and a millisecond of daytime filled my vision with what had arrayed in my yard. Dozens of coyotes had their heads poked out of the front of the long grass. To my left and right were yet more animals on the lawn, sitting and standing, stationary, zeroed in on me. "Zeus, here!" I snapped at him before he could do anything. His head whipped around, and he bounded towards me. As he began to run, several of the black shapes tensed, and one stepped into the circle of my light. Its slender head swung to focus on me. Cold black eyes maintained intense contact with mine. For the few seconds it took Zeus to cross the yard. A threatening, humanoid yell rose from the coyote's throat. I wish I had my gun. Zeus leapt past me into the house, his claws clattering on the wood as he turned around to growl at me. I scrambled inside and slammed the door behind me, breathing hard. Another flash, another clap of thunder, and the power was out. The soft, consistent drumming of rain was the only sound as the air conditioner and television shut off. I exhaled a lungful of air I hadn't realized I was holding. Resigned that my evening was over, I tried to call Zeus into the bedroom to turn in, but he could not be torn from the entryway. Every muscle in his body was tight, and his ears were angled sharply forward. He made no sound, but there was clearly no calming him. "It's okay, buddy. They can't get ya." I tried to soothe him, but it did no good. With another sigh of resignation, I pulled the couch from the living room so it faced the front door, sat, and patted the cushion next to me. Reluctantly, Zeus joined me on the couch, but didn't take his eyes off the door and the floor-to-ceiling glass panes on either side of it. The swirling moonlight cast a pale white glow on the porch outside. Even from behind the clouds, I found myself fading to the rhythmic sounds of the storm. I awoke with a start to a slow thudding noise. Zeus was sitting straight up next to me, and a deep growl started in his throat as I blinked away the cloud of sleep. The sound continued, coming from the front door. I turned the now weakening flashlight beam towards the tall window, and my blood ran cold. Dozens of eyes stared at me, set back a few feet from the window. Closer, though, was the source of the sound. A single coyote stood there, looking at me. It was tall and slender, and had its lips pulled back in a sharp, morbid smile. Its breath was barely audible, muffled by the glass and the distance. but as it rasped, I could see it creating a slowly pulsing, opaque circle. As I watched, it lowered its head, backed up, then lurched forward to headbutt the glass. The creature's maw fell open, slack, and it screamed as it threw its body against the window. The scream of a woman or a child in pain, tortured. A wet smudge was beginning to form on the pane. But as my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I saw that it wasn't rainwater. It was blood. I rose from the couch as quietly as I could. Zeus stayed behind, locked in. From all over the house, I gathered furniture in the ever-dimming light of my flashlight. First was a dresser. The kitchen table followed, and the chairs. Cushions and pillows filled the gap to obscure vision in and out. All the while, the slow thumping continued, interspersed with those horrible screams. Several minutes later, I had created a barrier about 4 feet tall that would hopefully help to quell whatever force was possessing the animals outside. Finally, I went to my bedside table, punched in my code, and retrieved my handgun from its confines. Shaking, I returned to my post beside Zeus to keep a constant vigil over the doorway. The only amount of sense that my scared, tired mind could muster was that hopefully the power would be back on soon, and I could look up a number for animal control. The storm continued, and Zeus and I kept our eyes on the door. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't even know how it could have been possible. All I recall is jolting awake to the sound of furniture scraping on the floor. Zeus began barking loudly into the pitch darkness, and as I jumbled with the safety on the gun, the door shifted and rocked as something threw its full weight against it. The latch was undone, and my blockade was the only thing keeping us safe. The rain pounded down, mirroring the slamming of blood in my ears as I scrambled to my feet. A dark shadow passed by the window, and my fingers squeezed the trigger twice in quick succession. The noise was deafening, and the light blinding. Glass shattered. Cold, wet air rushed in from the outside, whipping at my skin and clothing. Zeus yowled and snarled. Nearly hyperventilating and ears ringing, I went to peer through the broken glass of the window to the left of the door. I heard a terrible, ungodly scream of pain as my mind caught up with my body's reaction. I realized it was my own. My lovely wife had returned early from her conference. Inclement weather had meant many professionals were unable to come, so it was postponed. She'd returned in the dark hours of the early morning to find the power out, rendering her unable to come through the garage. She tried to push in my makeshift barricade and had stepped into view of the window just as I fired the gun. Now I'm on trial for murder, reflecting constantly on the events of that night and of the pond. If it weren't for that godforsaken pond and what it showed me, I could have been a little more blissfully ignorant. Things maybe wouldn't have transpired the way they did. Whoever reads this, please know it wasn't me. It was the Coyotes. They knew exactly what they were doing.